I suppose if I wanted to summarize this session in a way, Loretta showed us that the Irish economy was growing strongly. Perhaps the fifth year in a row will be the strongest growing economy in the EU. But at the same time, with Simon and John's presentations, we saw that we are facing two significant challenges in the form of Brexit and the housing market. And perhaps they are probably more relevant for your generation because nothing is sure yet in relation to Brexit. It needs to be developed. And housing, as to John's point, 2025 is perhaps going to be another crucial year in that way. So I'm going to open it to questions from some of the questions, for questions from someone on the floor. Anybody would like to ask a question? If you want to raise your hand. We'll get the microphone here.
Thank you. In relation to regional development in the 2040 plan, is there seriously going to be enough funding to grow other urban centres in Ireland other than Dublin? And also, what other inventive steps could the government take to do this? Thank you.
Who would like to take that first?
I'll have a go first.
Okay.
That's a hard one.
Do I need a microphone or am I okay?
You're okay.
I'm okay. So, good question. And actually, your question answers one of the key questions about the National Development Plan itself, which was that there is a concerted effort to try and concentrate development in urban centres. And I think that recognises two important realities in that kind of exercise. One is, and this isn't an Irish phenomenon, but it's an international phenomenon, which is that people have a desire to live in urban centres. And therefore, it makes sense to recognise that and plan for it. So that the challenge is to try and do it better in a more systematic way, and with a resource commitment that's credible and meaningful and hopefully likely to be acted on. And the second reality is that, and this is a political problem, which is that in any big, large-scale plan like that, the temptation is to spread the goodies everywhere. And that just isn't a plausible way to try and plan for development in an economy like Ireland. So we can't have kind of this sprawl approach which just allows things to just spread out further and further and further. There has to be a concerted effort to try and manage it in some way, and that's what the plan represents an attempt at trying to do. Ultimately, it'll be judged by the effectiveness in implementation, which is why a lot of people are focused not just on its aspirations, which I think are broadly going in the right direction, but also the ability to implement properly. I have other things to say about it, but I'll leave it there in case anybody else wants to add in anything.
Yeah, just I suppose on that, following on from a key aspect too is obviously housing, because in Dublin at the moment, is Dublin at capacity, and do we need more sustainable development outside of Dublin? So that's why it's a very important plan from that point of view, just to take some of the pressure off Dublin. But at the same time, if you look at Ireland, Ireland's a relatively small country size-wise. So in terms of how many external centres can you have that are sustainable and that are feasible from that? So it's a tricky balancing act from that point of view.
If I look at it from the wider economy perspective, and we talked about that the economy is growing and we expect that it's going to continue to grow quite strongly, but the guys have pointed out to the challenges. And when we think about things like Brexit, it's a challenge, but there may be some opportunities for some firms that are in the UK may want to come here. When we think just about our exporters and wanting to trade our goods and services, we need to be very competitive. So an important aspect of all of that is going to be around infrastructure and making sure we have the right housing in the right places, that we have the right transport infrastructure, that we have the right telecommunications like our webinar today, that we have the right water, energy and waste infrastructure. So all of those things are really important. So the plan, in focusing on those, is an important contribution to developing our economy and positioning us to benefit from the lot of opportunities that are there, as well as the challenges.
I might just add one thing to what
please.
Loretta and John have said, because it combines both of them, just with linking the housing, the need for housing and transport planning. One of the first studies I was involved in the early days of my economics career was a study on the potential for commuter rail services in Limerick. And the conclusion of it was that commuter rail wasn't really viable at that stage in Limerick. But part of the reason why that was the case was because there wasn't any attempt at trying to integrate housing planning with transport infrastructure that was already in existence. So, for example, Limerick is served by 4 different rail lines into Limerick City, which is an amazing starting point, or potential starting point. But there was never any concerted attempt to try and locate residential development along those rail lines. So you had this kind of sprawl where development just occurred willy-nilly all over without any kind of focus on aligning the planning of housing with the existing infrastructure. So it's not always about spending money, it's about also maybe planning and thinking smartly.
Loretta, you mentioned something there. I think in relation to Brexit discussions, most of the focus has been in relation to the challenges or the negative outcomes. But you mentioned that there will be opportunities for Ireland. Perhaps if you want to maybe, I mean, there might be some sectors, specific sectors where companies might want to come to Ireland. So do you want to further elaborate on that?
Yeah, and I mean, Simon has gone through the challenges, and they're very real challenges, and we see that firms have concerns. We know that there's been a hit to the pound, which is having an impact. We know that there's a lot of uncertainty, and we know that the UK economy will likely grow at a slower pace going forward. So one of the things we try to do a little bit is think about reframing that story and twisting it a little bit and going, okay, whilst there's lots of challenges, is there any potential opportunities? And businesses are often in this space where they're kind of going, okay, but is there an opportunity for me as well? And we're trying to do that for Ireland as well. And one of the areas is potentially firms that are in the UK that they can no longer access the EU market from the UK, but Ireland might be a good base for them to do so. An example of it would be actually the banking sector and the financial services sector in particular. And many of the firms are looking to access the EU market. Coming to Ireland, we're similar in many ways in terms of being English speaking, in terms of we have young, educated workforce, all you guys coming up through the ranks. We have a similar legal system, so we provide a good base for firms to set up here and to serve the market. So that's one area. And I think as this evolves, the nature of business, the nature of economies is that there is adapt and change, and we'll have to work with the challenges, but look to exploit the opportunities as well.
I suppose one thing again to mention is that Simon outlined some of the trade, some of the deals there that can be done between the UK and the EU, the options in a way. But most of those options, I think, rather than keeping the full EU membership, they cover goods. As far as I know, there's no international services agreement for services to be tradable. So in a way, service companies will have to, if they want to serve the European Union market from the UK, they'll have to be located within the EU in a way, unless they come up with a genuine sort of a exemplary agreement, services agreement.
Yeah, and well, that partly informs Loretta's point about why there's a potential opportunity here, because if there isn't so-called passporting, in other words, the ability of firms located in the European Union in any individual country automatically have the ability to passport their services into other countries within the Union. So if the UK leaves without access to the services markets, then it does potentially represent an opportunity for Ireland to attract either activity which is currently located in the UK but which needs to get diverted to find some way to serve the EU market, or alternatively, investment that might ordinarily get located in the UK just gets diverted into other markets, including Ireland. So there are certainly potentially opportunities. For sure. I just think that overall, if you add both sides of the ledger, I think net, you really do struggle, I think, to come to any other conclusion other than it will be a net negative, I think, at least is my view. One other maybe benefit, and Loretta touched on it, and I didn't, in relation to Brexit, which is Brexit itself hasn't happened yet. So it feels like we've been living this for a long time, but it actually hasn't happened. The UK is still in the EU. But one manifestation of Brexit is the weakness in the currency that Loretta touched on there. So in other words, markets have expressed a negative view on sterling and have sent the UK currency lower. That represents challenges for our exporters, because when they translate their sterling receipts back into euros, they get less for them. But it's actually kind of a good news story to an extent for Irish consumers, and it's one of the reasons why in Loretta's graphs it showed Irish inflation is quite a bit lower than it would otherwise be. So if we take, say, the period of time since the middle of 2016, so since the referendum itself, Irish prices, so the prices we all pay for goods and services, are about 3% lower than they would have been had sterling not weakened. So in other words, we've all got effectively a tax cut, a Brexit tax cut, because of that benefit from the fact that we import stuff from the UK, but we can buy that cheaper now because the UK currency has fallen, and since the middle of 2016 that amounts to about 3%. So that isn't going to change anybody's worldview or make everybody dramatically better off, but at the margin it helps, and it's one of the, I guess, one of the small upsides associated with what has happened so far.
Thank you. Perhaps I can get another question from the floor. There's 2 hands here. Do we have a microphone there? Yes.
What would you say are the main macroeconomic implications for Irish consumers in the case of expected interest rate increases, mainly by the FED and ECB in the short run?
John, do you want to?
So I suppose the key thing is when you look at what the market's expecting from the European Central Bank, it's not expecting any rate hikes from the Central Bank this year, and it's only towards the end of next year. In fact, if you look further out, so you can get a handle on what the market expects by looking at what's known as futures contracts. It's basically what the market is expecting different interest rates at different levels to be going forward. So you can look at the pricing of contracts, and it shows that by 2020 into 2021, it expects the ECB official interest rate to be only close to 1%. So what this tells you is over the next 3 to 4 years, it'll be very gradual rate increases from the ECB. So nothing's expected this year. And even into 2019, it's very gradual, maybe 10 to 15 basis points. And as Loretta pointed out in her presentation, what we see is that the Irish consumer is in a much healthier state now. If you look at the labour market, Loretta mentioned it's at 6%. But also if you look at another metric in terms of household indebtedness, so at the worst of the downturn, household debt as a percentage of disposable income was above 210%. So that's your key measure of household indebtedness. Now it's gone below 150%. So households are in a much better position now. And the key thing really is the economy is creating more jobs, I think, for the last 3 years for every consecutive quarter. So households are in a much better position to be able to deal with that. But what they'll have to deal with is only very gradual rate increases over the next 3 to 4 years. And the reason for that is that the European Central Bank, how it does policy, and that's what Simon referred to there in terms of inflation. Irish inflation is very low, but so is Eurozone inflation. So the ECB will be in no rush to increase interest rates because Eurozone inflation is close to 1%. And their target is 2%. So they don't need to be in any rush to hike interest rates because of that.
Thank you, guys. Any other questions? Yes, one more there. Do you have a microphone? There we go.
What are the implications for the Irish economy of the recent United States trade actions?
Do you want to take that, Loretta, or?
I can start it. So, as I was saying, we are a small open economy. So we trade. The US is an important trading partner for us, but it's also an important source of firms coming here, multinationals setting up here and serving the EU market and other markets. So we have a lot of foreign direct investment which comes from the US. So we're obviously always very cognizant of what's happening abroad, and particularly in the US in terms of tax, in terms of the EU also, where there's a number of tax developments happening, and then we're looking to the UK in terms of Brexit. So it's probably a little bit early to say. The cuts will provide some support to the consumers and to firms in the US, so we'll have a stimulus piece there, which will boost US growth, and that will boost US growth. It'll boost US growth, which will boost global growth, and so the Irish economy would expect to benefit from that. But then we'll be looking to the other side and saying, is that going to impact the behaviour of the firms that are based here from the US or who might come here in the future? It's probably a little bit of early days in terms of it, and we'll have to see how it feeds through and how it works. We have had some experiences of this in the past where the US did certain things and it didn't have too much of an effect. Most of the companies that were here already stayed, and a lot of the reason for that is because the companies coming are trying to serve the EU market, so they're trying to get access, and they're coming again because of the factors that I talked about earlier, are about our young, our educated workforce. So again, all you guys are the draw. But for some of them, they are coming for tax reasons as well. So if the dynamic changes, that may have an impact on it. I'll give you just an example. In our surveys, we do ask a question about this every couple of months, and we asked it twice now. Before, and in both cases, it was when before these new measures were announced. So it was when Trump got into power, and you saw there that people were worried and firms were worried about what impact Trump would have, and about a quarter or so of firms were telling us that they were going to hold back and not do anything till they see what way the Trump measures and what impact he had. A couple of months later, because nothing really was happening, that number fell quite a bit to about 16%. We've just asked the question again now after these taxes, and have been announced, and after the trade piece that's come through with the protectionist measures as well. So I'll be able to give you a more concrete answer at the end of March when I have my survey results in.
Simon or John, do you have anything to add?
Not hugely.
I think it's
other than-
important to recognise or highlight that trade and tax policy are quite important for Ireland, for the Irish economy.
Yeah, so and that's to Loretta's point. So we're like, what defines the Irish economy is its small size and its openness. We're one of the most open economies in the world. So if you think about the things that could go wrong, it's really, especially at the moment, it's mainly external risks. So things that change in the international environment that could adversely impact us. And there's a list of different things that could go wrong. Brexit is right up there, but also the uncertainty around trade policy in particular. So we think we know what the tax situation in the US is, even though even that's really complex and certainly not as bad as it could have been. But on the trade side of things, that's certainly some concerning developments over the last week or so in the US. So what is Trump trying to do? He's, I guess, potentially threatening a breakout of a world trade war. And what happens in a world trade war is there's less world trade conducted. And that's really bad news for a small open economy like us. So it's still not fully clear what he's getting at, because he hasn't actually done anything, he's just tweeted. So his tweets can be market moving, and you certainly saw a big market impact, but it's not clear exactly what is going to happen or when. But it certainly represents an important source of risk for the economy.
I might get, we're under time pressure now, so I might get one last question, if there's any.
We have one from school that's happening.
Oh yes, we have a question from Faye Butler from School Bura, Greenhill, Carrick-on-Suir. It's in relation to Brexit, and she wants to know whether Brexit will affect the trading with other countries in a way as to what will happen after Brexit.
Yeah, so part of it depends on how Irish firms respond to the Brexit challenge. So what is one obvious strategy for Irish firms to pursue, given that there are going to be known difficulties in continuing to serve or potentially targeting the UK market? And one obvious strategy is to diversify away from the UK market. And you know, there's some evidence that firms are having a bit of success there. So for example, one of the most important domestic sectors is the agri sector. And what was interesting to look at the latest figures we got a couple of weeks ago is that the growth, in other words, the uplift in agri exports in 2017 was greater in the EU than it was to the UK. And that highlights, I guess, the potential opportunity that firms have if they can succeed in diversifying their export markets away from the UK. So I think certainly that's one strategy which firms could usefully employ is to try and target other markets, and maybe some evidence that we're having a little bit of success, albeit it's early days on that front.
Okay. I think there's one last question from the floor. I'll take that.
What effects do you think changes in the housing market will affect the supply in the prices?
Yeah, so I suppose, as I said, the key issue at the moment is just the lack of supply. So till supply comes online, we're going to see continued upward pressure on prices. But what you would expect is that that rate of increase starts to moderate. So if you look at the chart I had up there earlier, showed that in year terms, prices were increasing by around 12% per annum. As more supply comes online, it should moderate down the level of price increases. But till we get back to a situation where there's equilibrium in the market, there still is going to be upward pressure on prices. But the rate of increase in prices should start to moderate, and in a normal economy where there's a functioning housing market, your level of house price increases should be somewhere close to where your nominal GDP is and where your employment growth is, so maybe somewhere in the region of 2 to 3%, but we're still at 12% at the moment. But what we expect is that rate of increase in prices starts to slow as more building comes online, and it's really building more houses is the key solution to it.
Thank you, guys. I think I'll have to stop it there. And I suppose, as I said earlier, even though we might be facing challenges in the form of mainly Brexit and perhaps housing, But I think as Loretta's presentation showed, the Irish economy is in pretty good shape, and we have some further opportunities in the future as well. I'd like to thank you all for your virtual attendance, and to our guests here, physically being here and asking the questions. I hope that you garner some key insights and learnings from our leading economists on the top economic issues of today. I'd like to thank Loretta, Simon, and John. Can I mention that the recording will be available on businesseducation.ie. This is the Banking and Payments Federation of Ireland's financial literacy and schooling resource website. I'm sure you all know it anyway, and you're following the website. So you may access this recording again in the future or share with your colleagues, peers, or friends in school. Also, I'd like to mention that as part of the European Money Week 2018, the national Irish sheets for the European Money Quiz will be taking place next Wednesday, 14th of March at midday. So details for the quiz, or if you would like to register, are also online at businesseducation.ie. Please do visit the website, as I believe, because I'm involved in it. I think it's a great resource. So it's been jointly developed by the Banking and Payments Federation of Ireland in conjunction with the Business Studies Teachers Association of Ireland. It has a number of learning resources for teachers and for students as well, leading cert business, economics, and accounting. Crucially, we have sample exam questions and worked out answers written and assessed by experienced teachers. An overview of and commentary on the most up-to-date figures on a range of key economic indicators, as well as useful links to business news stories that are relevant for your studies. Again, I would like to thank to our member banks here, the chief economists, for their participation. I think we've come to the end of our transmission today. Should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to email us at businesseducation@bpfi.ie. Thank you, guys.